Nyaya Vaisheshika because of their closely related metaphysical theories. Now, next one in the school is that of the Purva Mimamsa. The main objective of Purva Mimamsa school is to interpret and establish the authority of Vedas. Purva Mimamsa, to establish or interpret and establish the authority of Vedas. It requires unquestionable faith in the Vedas and the regular performance of Vedic sacrifices to sustain all the activity of the universe. Although in general, Mimamsa accept the logical and philosophical teachings of the other schools, they insist that salvation can only be attained by acting in accordance with the prescription of the Vedas. The school later shifted its views and began to teach the doctrines of Brahman and freedom, allowing for the release or escape of the soul from its constraints through enlightened activity. So we are dealing with the Astika systems, Astika school of systems, or the orthodox systems, in which we have the oldest one, that's of the Samkhya, then followed by Yoga, then Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva Mimamsa. Purva Mimamsa, it is interpretation of the, or interpret and establish the authority of Vedas. We have said that Vedas are the authority on which all this system stands. Those systems which accepts the authority of Vedas, unquestioning authority of Vedas. They are the ancient texts that is available for us and on which the systems are built around. And therefore the basis is the Vedas. And Vedas, the Purva Mimamsa interprets the Vedas and tries to establish there. And what they require is the unquestionable faith in the Vedas and the regular performance of sacrifices. So according to them, the entire universe is kept up on account of this, the performance of the sacrifices as prescribed in the Vedas. And that has to be done without any default. That means as prescribed, exactly following the Vedas prescription. The school later shifted its views and began to teach the doctrines of Brahman and freedom, allowing for the release or the escape of the soul from the constraints through enlightened activity. So in the course of time we will see also there is a the insistence on the teaching, not merely the interpretation and establishment of the authority of Vedas, but more on the side of the Brahman and the freedom. Then we come to the Vedanta. The Vedanta or Uttamimamsa, Purva Mimamsa and Uttamimamsa. The school concentrates on the philosophical teachings of Upanishads, or the mystic or spiritual contemplations of the Vedas, rather than the Brahmanas or the instruction for the ritual sacrifices. So Purva Mimamsa will insist on the ritualistic side of the Vedas. As prescribed in the Vedas, you perform those sacrifices and then you have keeping up the rhythm of the universe. So all these sacrifices are the ones which are promoting the equilibrium or to maintain the equilibrium. Whereas in the Uttamimamsa or the Vedanta, the school concentrates on the philosophical teachings of the Upanishads, the mystical or the spiritual contemplations within Vedas, rather than on the Brahmanas or the instructions for the ritual sacrifices. The Vedanta focuses on meditation, self-discipline, and spiritual connectivity. So the Purva Mimamsa and Uttamimamsa, Uttamimamsa, or called the Vedanta, end of Vedas. And what is that? The philosophical side of it, or the spiritual aspect of that. The Vedanta or the Uttamimamsa that would insist on meditation, self-discipline and spiritual connectivity more than the traditional ritualism. Due to rather cryptic or poetic in nature, the Vedanta Sutras, the schools separated into 6 sub-schools, each interpreting the text in its own way and producing its own sub-commentaries. And in the Vedanta, we have also another division, that is Advaita, the best known, which holds that the soul and Brahman are one and the same. Advaita, not two but one. Advaita. Then we have the Vishishta Advaita, which teaches that the Supreme Being has a definite form, name and attributes. Then the Dvaita Vedanta, which espouses the belief in 3 separate realities and eternal soul and matter, that is Vishnu, eternal soul and matter. Then Dvaita Advaita, which holds that Brahman exists independently while soul and matter are dependent. Then we have the Shuddha Advaita, which believes that Krishna is the absolute form of Brahman. And Achintya Abheda, which combines monism and dualism by stating that the soul is both distinct and non-distinct from Krishna or God. So what we need to understand here is that in the orthodox schools, that in the systems, we have that Vedanta or Uttamimamsa, which is focusing on the philosophical aspect or more on the meditation and self-discipline and spiritual connectivity. So then insisting on the ritualistic aspect. So Purva Mimamsa will insist on the ritualistic aspect or exact performance of the sacrifices to be done, whereas Uttamimamsa is going to insist on the spiritual contemplations within the Vedas. And since they have, due to the rather cryptic and poetic nature of the Vedanta Sutras, the schools are separated into 6 sub-schools. That is, we have the Advaita, Vishishta Advaita, Dvaita, then Dvaita Dvaita, Shuddha Advaita, then Achintya Bheda Abheda. So some 6 schools it has divided itself. So these are the schools which are belonging to the Astika system. So in brief, we have seen all that. That is Samkhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purvamimamsa and Uttamimamsa. So these are the schools belonging to. And in Uttamimamsa itself, it is divided into 6 sub-schools. And in each of them, even the Vaisheshika system also, there are so many subdivisions we will find. But the major schools in the Astika system or the orthodox group are these: Samkhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva Mimamsa and Uttamimamsa. And Uttamimamsa is also known as the Vedanta. Now we go to the heterodox system or the unorthodox system. The main heterodox or the Nastika schools, which do not accept the authority of Vedas, include Charvaka philosophy, also known as Lokayata. Charvaka is materialistic, skeptical and atheistic school of thought. So those schools which do not accept the authority of Vedas, they are classified into as the Nastika system. Those which accept the authority of Vedas, they are classified into Astika system. The Nastika school are the first one is the Charvaka philosophy, which is also known as Lokayata. Charvaka is pure materialism, skeptical and atheistic school of thought. Its founder was Charvaka, the author of Brahaspatya Sutras in the final centuries, in the first centuries BC. Although the original texts have been lost and our understanding of them is based largely on the criticism of the ideas. So there isn't anything original left with regard to the Charvaka philosophy or the Lokayata, pure materialism. What we have is only the interpretation and the criticism of the theory. So as early as the 5th century, Santani and Buddhaghosa connected the Lokayatas with Vedantas or the Sophists, and the term Charvaka was first recorded in the 7th century by the philosopher Purandara, and in the 8th century by Kamalasila and Haribhadra. As a vital philosophical school, Charvaka appears to have died out sometime in the 15th century. So what has happened to this? That is a pure materialism. It did not find much acceptance among the major or the dominant schools, that of the orthodox system. So there was a stiff opposition to that of the pure materialism, which is also known as Lokayata, and the founder is Charvaka, the author of the Brahaspatya Sutra in the Brahaspatya Sutra. Although the original texts have been lost, we do not have anything that is of the original, only the criticism of the theory, that is by later on the centuries they have mentioned about, even by Sadaniti and Buddhaghosa connected Lokayatas with Vedantas or the Sophists, the school of thought. And the term Charvaka was first recorded in the 7th century by the philosopher Purandara, and in the 8th century by Kamalasila and Haribhadra. As a vital philosophical school, Charvaka appears to have died out and sometime in the 15th century. So from then onwards, we don't hear much about that. The next one comes in this school, the Nastika system. So school is the Buddhist. Buddhism is a non-theistic system of beliefs based on the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, an Indian prince later known as Buddha in the 5th century BC. The question of God largely irrelevant in Buddhism, and it's mainly founded on the rejection of certain orthodox Hindu philosophical concepts, although it does share some philosophical views with Hinduism, such as belief in karma. Buddhism advocates a noble eightfold path to end suffering, and its philosophical principles are known as the Four Noble Truths: the nature of suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to cessation of suffering. Buddhist philosophy deals extensively with the problems in metaphysics, phenomenology, ethics, and epistemology. So in this school we have Buddhism or Buddhist school. Gautama Buddha, who wanted to know why there is suffering in the world, he wanted to put an end to that, he went in search for an answer to the question why there is suffering. He was a prince. He gave up all that, the luxuries of the palace, and went in search for an answer to the question why there is suffering. Long years he spent in meditation to get an answer to the question why there is suffering. And the moment of enlightenment came, then onwards he was known or called as Buddha, or the enlightened one. So his Siddhartha Gautama was his name, and then later on he was called Buddha by his enlightenment. Whenever we think of Buddha, immediately what comes to our mind is the Four Noble Truths and the Ashtanga Marga. The Four Noble Truths will tell us why or how suffering, what is the reason for suffering. First principle is, or the first noble truth is that there is suffering. And the second, the cause of this suffering. That's a desire is the cause of the suffering. Then third one, cessation, and then fourth one, the liberation from all that, or putting end to that. And the Ashtanga Marga goes into that, telling that how you will be able to get away from or vanish or remove all the karmic principles or the what you have accumulated through the karma. To certain points there is agreement with the practices of Hinduism, but majority, the major aspect is that the question of the authority of the scriptures and the belief in God, which Buddhism do not entertain there. So all what is accepted by them is that the theory of karma. So that is sacrosanct, that is very important, and that we will find in all the schools of philosophy. In the Indian schools of philosophy, we will find the insistence on karma. So the second school which comes in the Nastika system is Buddhism. Third one is Jainism. The central tenets of Jain philosophy were established by Mahavira in the 6th century BC, although Jainism as a religion is much older. A basic principle is Anekantavada, the idea that reality is perceived differently from different points of view, and that no single point of view is completely true. Similar to Western philosophical doctrine of subjectivism, Anekantavada. According to Jainism, only Kevalins, those who have infinite knowledge, can know true answer, and that all others would only know part of the answer. So that is the school of the Jainism. So Jainism will insist so much on the aspect of ahimsa, or total ahimsa, and the Jainist philosophy is that the soul is partially veiled, the veiled existence of the soul. So when the soul is restored to its pure state of having the perfect knowledge, vision, power, and all these things, then it is going to, then you are in the path of liberation. So Jainism, it stresses the spiritual independence and the equality of all life, with a particular emphasis on non-violence, and it posits self-control as vital for attaining realization of the soul's true nature. Jain belief emphasizes the immediate consequences of one's behavior. So this we can say that's the three schools which is coming into the group of the Nastika system. That is, one is the Charvaka philosophy, Charvakism, Buddhism, Jainism. Then Indian political philosophy, one is that is Arthashastra, attributed to Mauryan minister Chanakya in the 4th century BC, is one of the earliest Indian texts devoted to philosophical or political philosophy, and it discusses the idea of state art and economic policy. During the Indian struggle for independence at the early 20th century, Mahatma Gandhi popularized this philosophy of ahimsa, non-violence, and satyagraha, non-violent resistance, which were influenced by the teachings of Hindu Bhagavad Gita as well as Jesus. Tolstoy's Thoreau and Ruskin. So these are the schools which comes, or the three main schools. We can also include that of the Arthashastra into this category, which do not have so much, doesn't place itself in the authority of the Vedas as such, but not much mentioned. But these three schools definitely, that is Charvaka philosophy, Buddhism, Jainism. These three definitely belonging to the Nastika school of thought, or the unorthodox or heterodox system. So in the major division, what we have seen, that is of the orthodox group which accepts the authority of Vedas, and a heterodox group or unorthodox group which do not accept the authority of Vedas. So basing on the authority of Vedas, the two divisions have come. That is Astika system and Nastika system. Astika system accepting the authority of Vedas, and a Nastika system which do not accept the authority of Vedas in their arguments, or do not base themselves on that. So they have some other insistence, or what for them is that the philosophy and the way they conceive. There is a strict difference between Buddhism and Jainism. Buddha totally will negate the existence of anything that is permanent, even a soul. So for Buddhism, nothing is permanent, not even God, no self, nothing. So everything is momentariness or kshanika and dependent origination of everything. Whereas Jainism will insist on there is a soul for every living organism, and that is the main difference we find between Buddhism and Jainism. But both of them have some similarities and differences. In both these schools, certain aspects are common. In the Astika system and Nastika system, and very few. But there is something common in all the schools of thought in the philosophical. So that's what we are going to see next. The following characteristics are the common to all the system, all other systems. What are the common characteristics in them? All the schools emphasize that philosophy must have a positive impact on life of man. The schools have a general agreement on the importance of Purushartha. All the schools agree that philosophy should help man realizing the main ends of human life. So the Purusharthas are the Artha, Kama, Dharma, Moksha. So that insistence is there. All the philosophies, that is, all the schools emphasize that philosophy must have a positive impact on the life of man. The schools have a general agreement on the importance of the Purusharthas. All the schools agree that the philosophy should help man realizing the ends of human life, the Purusharthas, that are Artha, Kama, Dharma, Moksha. The second commonality or the agreement is that all systems reflect that the philosophy should lead man from darkness and ignorance to light and knowledge. So what is the goal of philosophy? To lead the human person to the truth, or from darkness and ignorance to light and knowledge. So there is an agreement on the aspect. The third commonality among the schools is that there is a general agreement among the systems that the truth and reality should be verifiable. They should be substantiated with reasoning and experience. An experience may be sensory, conceptual, or intuitional. So there is a common agreement, that the general agreement among the systems that truth and reality should be verifiable. It is not just a blind belief. So it should be verifiable, and maybe through an experience may be sensory or conceptual, or it is intuitional. The fourth common agreement is that it is accepted by all the schools that man's suffering results from his ignorance. Man can conquer ignorance and attain goal, freedom, that is moksha, in this bodily existence. So what is the cause of the bondage of man? That is his ignorance. So by avoid or eliminating that ignorance, then is the way to the freedom. The fifth agreement is that there is a general agreement on man's essential spirituality. So there is a common agreement on the man's essential spirituality in this. So there we can draw 5 common agreement on the different schools of thought. The first one is that all the schools emphasize that philosophy should have something positive in the life of man, impact on life. The schools have a general agreement on the importance of the reaching of the Purusharthas. So philosophy should promote something positive and a outlook on life as such. And what we have seen what is the human life, that 4 ends: artha, kama, dharma, moksha. Artha and kama leading to dharma, and dharma leading to moksha. So final liberation. Yeah. Okay. Then we'll stop. So we have seen that 5 agreement which tells us that some commonality. First one is that should be something positive. Second one, all systems reflect on the philosophy should be lead man from darkness and ignorance, to light and knowledge. Then third, there is a general agreement among the system that truth and reality should be verifiable. Fourth one, it is accepted by all the schools that man's suffering results from his ignorance. And the fifth one is the general agreement on man's essential spirituality. So man is essentially spiritual. That is the common acceptance among all the schools of thought. So from here we can see that the 2 systems which we have dealt with based on the authority of Vedas as such, that is orthodox and heterodox system. Now we go to a little bit about the history of Indian philosophy. Where does it begin? The historians go on debating the origin of the Aryans and the time period when the Vedic civilization developed in India. It is believed that the Western scholars that the Aryans descended in the regions of North Central Asia sometime around 1500 BC. Though this has been challenged by some other learned scholars. Some of them, eminent Indian scholars, also differ from their Western counterparts. So there is some confusion with regard to the exact date of the starting of Indian philosophy, when. So historically we are trying to establish when did the Indian philosophy, the systematization of the Indian philosophy began, or to what time can we trace back. So some say that it is with the coming of Aryans, or was it there much before. The philosophy is developed over long spells of time. It is difficult for the historians to ascertain the period for the development of particular philosophy. However, we can safely outline the history of Indian philosophies as per Dr. Radhakrishnan as follows. So we are going to divide the history into let's say 4 parts. First is the Vedic period, that is 1500 BC to 600 BC. Then the epic period, so Vedic period, epic period, Sutra period, and the scholastic period. So this will give us more or less a very good view on how did the philosophy develop, the Indian philosophy. So we are going to the history, what can we trace back. So the division is made according to the available documentation, and then into 4 periods we are dividing the history of Indian philosophy: the Vedic period, the epic period, Sutra period, and the scholastic period. Can stop.